My fiancé's family thrust a prenup at me, his mother smirking. "This ensures you walk away empty-handed." He said nothing. But when I inherited $45 million, 0 cents, their faces drained of color. I should have known the world was about to explode when the air smelt like gasoline and betrayal. It was a Tuesday morning in Manhattan, the kind where the city hums with ambition and secrets, and I was stepping out of my office on West 57th Street, my heels clicking against the pavement, when the world turned to fire. The explosion wasn't loud at first, just a low, guttural roar like a beast waking up. Then the shockwave hit, throwing me against the glass doors of my nonprofit's headquarters. My ears rang, my vision blurred, and the acrid stench of burning rubber filled my lungs. Somewhere behind me, my car, my unassuming black Audi, the one I'd bought with my first big paycheck, was a twisted heap of metal, flames licking the sky. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, glass shards biting into my palms. Pedestrians screamed, phones were out, filming the chaos, but all I could think was, this wasn't an accident. My name is Eleanor Harper. L to the few who know me beyond the headlines, and I'd just survived a car bomb. The realization hit like a second blast. Someone wanted me dead, and I had a sickening feeling I knew who. I'm not a stranger to danger. As an investigative journalist turned CEO of Truth Vanguard, a nonprofit exposing corporate corruption, I've had my share of threats. Anonymous emails, slashed tires, the occasional drunk heckler at a gala. But this was personal. This was the Wentworths, the family I was supposed to marry into, sending a message louder than any headline I'd ever written. My fiancé, Julian Wentworth, heir to a media empire that could make or break governments, was the golden boy of a dynasty that played chess with lives, and I'd just become a pawn they wanted off the board. The sirens wailed closer, red and blue lights slicing through the morning haze. A cop grabbed my arm, asking if I was hurt, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing, replaying the last 48 hours, searching for the moment I'd crossed the line. Was it the exposé I'd published last month? The one that hinted at Wentworth Media's ties to offshore lobbying? Or was it something deeper? Something tied to the prenup they'd shoved in my face 2 nights ago. The one that felt less like a contract and more like a death warrant. Let me take you back to that night, because that's where the real fuse was lit. Picture the Wentworth's Park Avenue penthouse, a glittering fortress of glass and gold, the kind of place that makes you feel small even in your best dress. I was there for what Julian called a family celebration, though it felt more like a tribunal. The chandelier dripped crystals, the wine cost more than my rent, and the air was thick with the kind of wealth that buys silence. I was in a navy gown, my hair swept up, trying to look like I belonged, but every glance from the Wentworths reminded me I didn't. Julian's mother, Cecilia Wentworth, sat at the head of the table like a queen presiding over her court. Her silver hair was flawless, her smile sharper than the steak knives. Julian was to my left, his hand resting on mine under the table, but his eyes kept darting to his mother, like a soldier awaiting orders. His father Edward was there too, all cigar smoke and old money arrogance, along with a dozen cousins and uncles whose names I could never keep straight. They were the kind of family that didn't just inherit wealth, they inherited power. The kind that could rewrite laws or ruin lives with a phone call. Dinner was a parade of small talk about yacht races and private islands, the kind of chatter that makes you feel like an outsider even when you're invited. I tried to keep up, mentioning a recent Truth Vanguard project that exposed a pharmaceutical scam, but Cecilia's eyes glazed over, and Edward coughed into his napkin. Julian squeezed my hand, a silent, "don't push it." Then, as dessert was served, some ridiculously delicate chocolate thing that looked like it took a team of chefs to assemble. Cecilia stood, her silk dress rustling like a warning. "Eleanor," she said, her voice honeyed but cold, "we have a little tradition in our family." She reached for a black velvet folder, sliding it across the table with the precision of a sniper. "This ensures you walk away with nothing but your name." The room went still. I felt Julian's hand slip from mine, his fingers suddenly clammy. I opened the folder, my hand steady despite the pulse hammering in my throat. Inside was a prenuptial agreement, 12 pages of dense legal text, each clause a blade. No claim to Wentworth assets, no stake in their media empire, no rights to intellectual property, even from projects we'd build together. It wasn't just a prenup. It was a declaration that I was disposable, a temporary guest in their world, to be escorted out when they were done. I looked at Julian, waiting for him to say something, anything. His face was pale, his jaw tight, but his eyes were fixed on the table, like he was studying the grain of the wood. Silence. That's what hurt the most. Not Cecilia's smirk, not the cousin's stifled snickers, but Julian's absence. The man who'd whispered "I love you" in a quiet moment last week, who'd promised we'd build a life together, was letting his mother gut me in front of his family, and he didn't even blink. "Well now?" I asked, my voice low but steady, locking eyes with Cecilia. She tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. "We protect what's ours, dear. This is just a formality, in case things don't work out." Her pause was deliberate, a knife twisted just so. "We wouldn't want you to leave with anything you didn't bring." The implication was clear. I was nothing, a nobody from a modest Brooklyn upbringing, a journalist who'd clawed her way up through grit and late nights, not trust funds and connections. They saw me as a threat, a loose cannon who might tarnish their empire or, worse, claim a piece of it. I closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and stood. "If this is your welcome, I'd rather not stay." Cecilia's laughter followed me as I walked out, my heels echoing on the marble floor. Julian didn't follow. Not then. Not when I stepped into the elevator. Not when I hailed a cab in the rain-soaked street below. I sat in the back seat, my dress clinging to my skin, and stared at the city lights blurring past. That's when I knew. I wasn't just fighting for my future. I was fighting for my life. Back to the present, standing in the wreckage of my car, I realized the bomb wasn't the first strike. It was the escalation. That night, after the gala, I'd gone home to my loft in Chelsea, a place I'd made my own with books and plants and a view of the Hudson. I'd barely kicked off my shoes when I noticed the lock on my door was scratched, the frame slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I pushed the door open, my pulse racing, and found my apartment torn apart. Drawers emptied, cushions slashed, my laptop gone. On the kitchen counter, pinned under a knife from my own drawer, was a note. "Sign or disappear." I didn't call the police. Not yet. I knew the Wentworths had half the NYPD in their pocket, and I wasn't about to play their game on their board. Instead, I grabbed my backup drive, a burner phone, and a bag of essentials, and got out. I spent the night in a cheap motel in Queens, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable stains, lying awake, replaying Cecilia's words, Julian's silence, and that note. The Wentworths weren't just protecting their fortune. They were protecting a secret, and I was the key they wanted to bury. The next morning, I woke to a notification on my phone, a headline from the New York Chronicle, a paper I'd long suspected was a Wentworth mouthpiece. "Nonprofit CEO Eleanor Harper under fire for alleged fraud." The article was a masterclass in character assassination, accusing me of funneling Truth Vanguard funds into personal accounts, complete with forged documents and quotes from anonymous sources. My inbox was flooded with angry donors, my board was in a panic, and my reputation, built over a decade of exposing liars, was crumbling in real time. I called Maya Torres, my COO and the only person I trusted not to flinch in a crisis. We met at a diner in Hell's Kitchen, the kind where the coffee's bitter and the booths are sticky, but nobody listens in. Maya slid into the seat across from me, her dark eyes scanning the room like a hawk. "This is the Wentworths," she said, no preamble. "They don't just play dirty, Elle. They play chess with lives, not pieces." I told her about the prenup, the ransacked apartment, the note. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look surprised. "You need to dig," she said, pushing a USB drive across the table. I pulled some files from a contact at Wentworth Media. "There's an email from Cecilia, dated a year before you met Julian. It mentions a strategic engagement to neutralize a threat. That threat's you." I stared at the drive, my fingers curling around it. Why me? I was nobody back then. Maya leaned in, her voice low. "That's what you need to find out. What do they know about you that you don't?" That question haunted me as I drove north, heading for a safe house in upstate New York, a cabin Maya's cousin owned, off the grid. The city gave way to highways, then winding roads flanked by pines, but the unease in my chest only grew. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting a tail. I wasn't wrong. A black SUV appeared behind me, too close, its tinted windows like eyes that wouldn't blink. I floored the gas, my rental car straining, but the SUV matched me, then swerved, clipping my bumper. The wheel jerked in my hands, and the world spun as my car skidded off the road, crashing into a ditch. Pain shot through my shoulder, but adrenaline kept me moving. I grabbed my bag and stumbled out, the SUV's headlights cutting through the dusk. I ran, branches snapping under my boots, my breath ragged. The forest was dense, the air cold, and my phone had no signal. Jammed, I realized, by whoever was hunting me. I heard footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate, but I didn't look back. I kept running until I found a stream, wading through the icy water to mask my trail, and hid in a hollowed-out tree until dawn. When I finally made it to the cabin, I collapsed on the floor, my clothes soaked, my hands shaking. I plugged Maya's USB into an old laptop and opened the files. There it was, Cecilia's email, sent 18 months before I met Julian at a charity auction. "Eleanor Harper's work poses a risk to our Q4 objectives," it read. "A controlled engagement will neutralize her influence and secure our narrative." Controlled engagement. They hadn't just planned my marriage. They'd planned my silence. But there was more. A Wentworth trust clause, buried in a 200-page document, predating my relationship with Julian. It barred any non-family spouse from corporate or political power, specifically naming me as a potential liability. They'd known I'd dig, known I'd fight, and they'd laid the trap before I even walked into it. I sat back, the cabin's silence pressing against me, and realized this wasn't about love. It was about control. Julian called as I was packing to leave the cabin. His voice was smooth, practiced, the same tone he used in boardrooms. "Elle, I had no idea about the prenup. It was my mother's idea, a formality. Please, come back. We can fix this." I wanted to believe him. God, I did. I remembered the way he'd kissed me under a streetlight in Soho, promising we'd build something real. But his words now felt like a script, and I was done playing the fool. "You knew," I said, my voice flat, "and you let her humiliate me." Oh, I hung up, my thumb hovering over the block button. I didn't press it. Not yet. I needed answers, and Julian was still a piece of the puzzle. Back in Manhattan, I kept a low profile, working from a co-working space in Brooklyn to avoid the Wentworths' radar. But they weren't done. Truth Vanguard was hit with an IRS audit, a surgical strike orchestrated by a Wentworth ally in D.C. The notice came with a deadline, 72 hours to produce years of financial records, or we'd face dissolution. My team was scrambling, donors were pulling out, and the smear campaign was gaining traction. I was losing everything I'd built, and the Wentworths were just getting started. That's when I found the file that changed everything. Buried in Maya's USB was a document labeled Asset X. It wasn't a person. It was me. The Wentworths had marked me as a pawn in a merger with a European conglomerate, a shadowy group with ties to NATO defense contracts. My engagement to Julian wasn't just a PR stunt. It was a geopolitical play designed to secure influence in Brussels and Washington. I was their diversity angle, their redemption narrative, a way to clean their image while locking me in a gilded cage. I was still processing when Maya called with worse news. They got to your mentor, L. Professor Langston. He leaked our donor list to the Wentworths. We're hemorrhaging support. Langston, the man who'd taught me to chase truth, who'd written my grad school recommendation. He'd been like a father, and now he'd sold me out. I felt the betrayal like a physical blow, but there was no time to grieve. I had to move, and fast. I booked a flight to London for a summit where I was set to speak on corporate accountability. If the Wentworths wanted a fight, I'd take it global. But London was a mistake. Halfway through my speech, my throat tightened, my vision swam, and I collapsed, the podium crashing under me. I woke up in a hospital, a doctor explaining I'd been poisoned, a slow-acting toxin in my water, designed to mimic a heart attack. I'd survived, but the message was clear. The Wentworths weren't just playing chess anymore. They were playing for blood. As I lay in that hospital bed, a package arrived. No return address, just a wax seal I recognized instantly. My father's. He'd been a whistleblower, dead 5 years from what the coroner called a heart attack, though I'd never believed it. Inside the package was a note in his jagged handwriting. They'll try to bury you. Show them your roots run deeper. With it was a key to a safe deposit box in Manhattan, and encrypted files that, when cracked, revealed Wentworth ties to illegal lobbying, names, dates, dollar amounts, and a trust fund, $45 million, 0 cents left to me, untouchable by anyone. I flew back to New York, the files burning a hole in my bag. The Wentworths had frozen my bank accounts, citing suspected fraud, leaving me unable to pay my lawyers. But my father's gift was a lifeline and a weapon. I confronted Julian at a rooftop bar in Tribeca, the city sparkling below us like a promise neither of us could keep. He looked tired, his tie loosened, his eyes pleading. I was following orders, Al. I love you. We can still make this work. You knew about the prenup, I said, my voice ice. 2 years ago, you signed off on it. Don't lie to me. He flinched, his hands gripping the railing. I didn't have a choice. You don't say no to my family. Then you should have said no to me. I turned and walked away, the wind swallowing his voice as he called after me. That night, I boarded a flight to Sydney, chasing a lead on the European conglomerate. But the Wentworths were one step ahead. My hotel room was ambushed. 2 men in black, faces masked, guns drawn. I escaped through the fire escape, my heart pounding as flames roared behind me. The room engulfed. I caught a red-eye back to New York, my hands still trembling, but my resolve unbroken. I was done running. The Wentworths thought they could break me, but they'd forgotten one thing. I was my father's daughter, and I had a story to tell, one that would bring their empire to its knees. The world doesn't stop spinning when your life catches fire. It just spins faster, daring you to keep up. I was holed up in a nondescript motel in Newark, the kind where the walls are thin and the air smells of stale cigarettes, my burner phone buzzing with alerts that felt like punches. It was 3 days after I'd escaped the Sydney hotel ambush, my hands still raw from gripping the fire escape, my mind replaying the flames that devoured my room. I'd flown back to New York under an alias, Jane Carter, a name as bland as the coffee I was sipping, but anonymity was a flimsy shield against the Wentworths. They weren't just a family, they were a machine, and I was a glitch they were determined to erase. I opened my laptop, the screen's glow casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The latest blow was a deep fake video, viral within hours, showing me, confessing to laundering money through Truth Vanguard. My face, my voice, but not my words. I betrayed my donors, the fake me said, eyes glistening with crocodile tears. I used their trust for personal gain. The video had racked up millions of views, trending on every platform from X to TikTok, with hashtags like Harper Fraud and Truth Vanguard Scam. My nonprofit's inbox was a war zone of hate mail. My board was in chaos, and my reputation, built on a decade of chasing truth, was being shredded in real time. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. The Wentworths weren't just playing dirty, they were rewriting my story, turning me into the villain in their narrative. I could almost hear Cecilia Wentworth's voice, that silken venom from the gala. This ensures you walk away with nothing but your name. They weren't content with taking my future. They wanted my identity too. But if they thought a deepfake would break me, they'd underestimated the woman they'd tried to cage. I grabbed my burner phone and texted Maya Torres, my COO and the only person I trusted to see through this storm. Need a counterplay, fast. Her reply came in seconds. Meet me at the usual, bring everything. The usual was a dive bar in Brooklyn, a place called the Rusty Anchor, where the jukebox played Springsteen and nobody asked questions. I pulled on a hoodie, tucked my hair under a cap, and slipped out into the night, the motel's neon sign flickering like a warning. The city was alive, oblivious to my war. Taxis honked, street vendors shouted, and Times Square's lights glared like a fever dream. I kept my head down, weaving through crowds, my pulse spiking every time a shadow lingered too long. Paranoia was my new normal, but it wasn't baseless. The Wentworths had already bombed my car, ransacked my apartment, chased me off a road, poisoned me in London, and torched my hotel room. Each attack was a message. Sign or die. I wasn't signing, and I wasn't dying. Not yet. At the Rusty Anchor, Maya was waiting in a corner booth, her leather jacket blending into the dim light. She slid a manila envelope across the table as I sat down. "You look like hell," she said, her voice low but warm. "But you're still standing, so that's something." "Barely," I said, opening the envelope. Inside were printouts of internal Wentworth emails, intercepted by an anonymous source Maya wouldn't name. The subject line of one made my blood run cold. Operation Legacy, Harper Neutralization. The email outlined a plan to use my engagement to Julian as a PR stunt, framing me as a redemption narrative to rehab Wentworth Media's tarnished brand after a bribery scandal. My photo was attached, captioned, "Minority Optics, Strong Appeal to Progressive Markets." I wasn't a fiancé, I was a diversity checkbox, a calculated play to win back public trust. I pushed the papers away, my hands trembling. They planned this before I met Julian. Why me? What do they know that I don't? Maya leaned in, her eyes sharp. "That's what we need to figure out. But there's more. Cecilia spooked about your trust fund. The $45 million, 0 cents your dad left you. It's not just money. It's tied to something she's desperate to keep buried. I thought of my father's note, tucked in my bag like a talisman. They'll try to bury you, show them your roots run deeper. The trust fund, the encrypted files, the safe deposit box. They were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't solved. Why did Cecilia fear them? What was the Wentworths' financial Achilles heel? And how did my inheritance threaten it? The questions gnawed at me, but there was no time to dwell. The deep fake was tanking Truth Vanguard, and I had to fight back before the Wentworths landed their next blow. My counterplay was a gamble, one that could either save me or burn me alive. I spent the next 48 hours in a Brooklyn safe house, a cramped apartment above a laundromat, drafting a prenup of my own. It was a mirror to the Wentworths' 12 pages, airtight, demanding full transparency and joint control of their media assets, including intellectual property and future ventures. If they wanted to play contracts, I'd play harder. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was rewriting their rules. Maya arranged a meeting with the Wentworth board, leveraging a contact who owed her a favor. The location was their corporate headquarters in Midtown, a glass tower that screamed untouchable wealth. I walked in, flanked by 2 armed security guards, ex-Marines I'd hired through a discreet agency. The Wentworths had tried to kill me 5 times. I wasn't taking chances. The boardroom was a cathedral of power. Mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a dozen suits staring at me like I was a bug they'd meant to squash. Cecilia sat at the head, her silver hair gleaming, her smile a blade. Julian was to her right, his eyes avoiding mine. Edward, his father, lounged at the far end, a cigar smoldering in his hand. "Eleanor," Cecilia said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "This is bold, even for you." I set my prenup on the table, the pages fanning out like a challenge. "You wanted a contract. Here's mine. Joint control, full transparency, or the engagement's off. And I go public with everything I know." The room tensed. A board member coughed, another shifted in his seat. Cecilia's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. "You're overplaying your hand, dear." Before I could respond, the projector behind her flickered, unprompted. A memo flashed on the screen, stark black text on white. "Eliminate Harper if prenup is rejected. All measures authorized." Gasps rippled through the room. Julian's head snapped up, his face ashen. Cecilia's composure cracked, just for a second, her hand gripping the table. I didn't flinch, but my heart was a drumbeat. Someone had hacked the system, or betrayed them from within. Either way, the memo was a death sentence, with my name on it. Edward stood, his voice a low growl. "Turn that off. Now." A tech scrambled to comply, but the damage was done. He turned to Julian, his eyes hard. "Sign the damn paper, son. She's got us by the throat." Julian's hand shook as he reached for the pen, my pen, the one my father had used for every major deal, its gold surface etched with his initials. He signed, the scratch of ink louder than the silence. I nodded once, took the document, and walked out, my security trailing me. The pen stayed on the table, gleaming like a promise I'd already kept. I should have felt triumphant, but victory was a fleeting guest. That night, my safe house was firebombed. I was out, meeting a source, when the explosion lit up the Brooklyn sky. I watched from a block away, flames devouring the apartment, my few belongings reduced to ash. The message was clear. The Wentworths weren't done. I relocated to a new safe house under a second alias. My identity now a liability. My face too recognizable from the deep. I was a ghost in my own city, and the weight of it was crushing. Maya called with a bombshell of her own. "I got a leak from Claire Evans, a junior PR staffer at Wentworth Media. She's got emails proving Cecilia orchestrated your engagement for political gain. a deal to secure a Senate vote on a defense contract. And get this, Julian cried when he heard about your inheritance, said, "She's untouchable now." It's the only real thing he's ever said. I met Claire at a coffee shop in the East Village, a place with mismatched chairs and too many hipsters to notice us. She was young, barely 24, her hands trembling as she slid a USB across the table. "They used your story in pitch decks," she whispered. "Called you a minority optics win. But there's more. Your dad, he didn't die naturally. He was digging into Wentworth lobbying deals. They silenced him." The words hit like a freight train. My father, the whistleblower who'd taught me to question everything, hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been murdered, and the Wentworths were behind it. I gripped the table, my vision blurring, not with tears, but with rage. Claire's eyes darted to the door. "They'll come for me next," she said. "But you needed to know." I thanked her, slipped the USB into my pocket, and left, my mind a storm. The files confirmed it. Payments to a private firm, coded as consulting, dated the week before my father's death. The Wentworths hadn't just targeted me, they'd destroyed my family to protect their empire. I was done hiding. I canceled the wedding that night, posting a statement on Truth Vanguard's site. Love shouldn't come with a kill order. I'm walking away, but not in silence. I uploaded the Wentworth files, every email, every memo, every damning detail, to a whistleblower platform, anonymized but verified. Within hours, they went viral, spreading like wildfire across X, Reddit, and news feeds worldwide. Protests erupted outside Wentworth offices in New York, London, and Sydney, crowds chanting "Truth over power." The hashtag Wentworth Exposed trended globally, with influencers dissecting the Operation Legacy proposal, my photo plastered across screens as a symbol of resistance. But the Wentworths didn't go quietly. I was subpoenaed to testify before Congress, accused of leaking classified data, a setup by a senator in their pocket. The hearing was a circus, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, but I walked in with my head high, the USB in my purse. "I'm not the criminal here," I said, my voice steady. "The Wentworths are." I handed over the files, and the room exploded. The fallout was seismic. Major advertisers pulled funding from Wentworth Media, their stock plummeting 30% overnight. Cecilia resigned as chairwoman, citing personal reasons, her polished facade crumbling on live TV. A senator linked to the Wentworths was indicted for corruption, my files cited as evidence, sending shockwaves through Capitol Hill. Edward issued a televised apology, his voice dripping with rehearsed regret, but I didn't watch. I was done with their theater. Amid the chaos, a London-based foundation emailed me, offering to fund Truth Vanguard, now rebranded as the Harper Voice, fully, with office space, staff, and global reach. I agreed, but on my terms. No exploiting pain. We amplify marginalized voices, not their trauma. They said yes, and the Harper Voice was born. Launching with The Price of Power, a docuseries tracing how wealth weaponizes love and trust. My face landed on Time magazine's cover, the headline bold, "The Woman Who Broke an Empire." Julian's email came late one night, subject line blank. Did I ever mean anything? I stared at it, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I remembered his laugh, his touch, the promises we'd made, but I also remembered his silence, his signature on a prenup meant to erase me. I deleted the email, blocked him, and felt nothing but relief. I deleted the wedding folder from my laptop, guest lists, dress sketches, vows I'd never say. The screen asked, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes, and the weight lifted, like shedding a skin I'd outgrown. In my journal, I wrote to the girl I used to be. You weren't reckless. You were relentless. They feared your fire because it burned brighter than theirs. I moved into a secure loft in Manhattan, its minimalist design a canvas for my new life. The Harper Voice secured a UN partnership, amplifying our mission to every corner of the globe. One morning, I stood by my window, coffee in hand, the city skylines stretching before me. The Wentworths had tried to write my story, but I'd taken the pen. Real power doesn't need a signature. It writes its own ending.